Hey you guys, time once again for Tomes of Terror. I apologize, this is a little bit later going up than usual, and if you're one of our patrons, then normally you would have been seeing it a day early, like I would usually have posted it on Sunday, but unfortunately I just didn't get around to it. I was a little bit late. I didn't get the entire book read, in time for the video to go up early. So at least I'm getting it up on Monday, which is the day that it would normally go up. But again, I'm sorry for any, inconvenience that might have caused. I'm sure it wasn't causing any inconvenience, but you know what I mean. I like to get stuff up in a timely fashion, so I always feel bad when I don't, but hopefully it won't happen again. It was just the last video, one of the last videos that I did over the weekend, took way longer than I thought. So I just didn't get enough chance to read, but I'm doing it now. So finally. So in my recent mega video discussing the VHS movie franchise, which incidentally was why this video took me longer to get to, because that took way longer than I was expecting, I mentioned that found footage horror wasn't really usually my go-to subgenre, though of course I listed a bunch of examples of it that I did actually really like a lot. Interestingly though, right around the time that I was planning this, mega video that I was doing on the VHS franchise, a friend of the show in New York City, DJ Maniak, sent me a Facebook message and showed me this really cool looking new horror anthology book that was just published in early October of 2022, and it was called Found, an anthology of found footage horror stories, and it was edited by Andrew Cull and Gabino Iglesias. Now, aside from the absolutely stellar cover design, which looked like a old beat up Memorex videotape, I mean, I can really, you guys know, I'm a graphic designer, so if you do some awesome graphics and some cool theming and shit like that, I'm gonna be on board and just hope that the story's good, but that's absolutely gonna get me to want to read it. I mean, the whole thing sounded like a really neat concept, though I will admit at first that I wasn't entirely sure what the stories were gonna be like. For the only thing I can think of, I was well, would found footage in written form, would it manifest as an epistolary novel like Dracula or something like that, or would there be other variations? What are the parameters? What are we talking about? And happily I was able to find out because aforementioned friend DJ Maniak actually bought the ebook for me, so thank you very much for that, DJ Maniak, much appreciated. And I finally got to read it over this past weekend. I read it on Sunday. And I have to say, again, very happily, this is easily one of the most consistently great anthologies that I have had the pleasure of reading. Every single story was great to excellent. And although obviously, just like in any anthology, some of them, were more my cup of tea than others, but there wasn't a single one that I didn't think was outstanding, absolutely worth reading in one way or another. I should also note too that my initial idea of all the stories being essentially told through emails or something like that, for example, was way too limited. Yeah, some of the stories were told like that, but this was I was impressed by the variation of these kind of mixed media stories. Some of them were made up of, for example, a series of texts, police reports, handwritten messages, and so on. Some were told as journal entries, some were told as court depositions or video transcripts, and some were actually told in kind of traditional narrative style, like a regular story, but had a story that focused on some kind of found media, as its sort of central theme. So, I mean, I was actually really pleased at the vast diversity of formats in here. And also it was cool that they all, even though they were all really diverse and different, they all very easily fit within the found footage framework. You weren't reading some of the stories and be well, that's a reach, you know what I mean? Because I kind of feel as much as I loved the Halloween anthologies that I did over toward the end of October, in a couple of those, there were some stories in there that I would be well, that wasn't really a Halloween story, you know what I mean? But this one, I never got that. Every single one of them had a found footage kind of thing. None of them seemed like they didn't belong or anything like that, but they were all still really different. And the whole collection too, I guess this isn't surprising, but it gave me a really strong ARG or creepypasta kind of vibe. And that was actually one of my favorite things about it, was again that the stories gave you that kind of mood to them, but they were all still really different and really stood out from one another. So the first story is called 2 Months Too Long by Holly Ray Garcia. And this one unspools as it's a series of increasingly alarming text messages from a very clearly unhinged ex-girlfriend. And later on, like, it starts out with a bunch of text messages, and then it's like later interspersed with like work emails, like handwritten notes, personal emails, police incident reports, photos, and so on, as the aforementioned girlfriend, whose name is Shonda, starts to kind of escalate her campaign of terror against this guy she's been dating for only 2 months, like hence why the story is called 2 months too long. His name is Alex, by the way. This one was actually like a great start to the book. It really kind of like set the theme, established the tone, and it really kind of like immersed you right into this very chillingly realistic scenario, which, you know, I've known some people that went through some very similar things to this, and this is pretty much how the kind of shit plays out. And it goes also towards some like pretty gross and like dark places at the end. So yeah, this was a really good one. So the next story was Josh Roundtree's Face Down Death, Volume 8. And this was actually laid out as kind of like a regular story, like it was a regular narrative format, but it centered around a young boy who was obsessed with those kind of like real death compilation videos that were, you know, all the rage like back in the 80s and 90s, like Faces of Death being the most popular, but there were some other knockoff brands as well. I really liked this story too, because it kind of like brought back memories of watching like really messed up shit, like all those old grotty VHS tapes that you got like from the mom and pop video store down the street back in the day. Oh, and I also really liked the kind of real bizarre, like somewhat kind of supernatural, but like I said, also kind of creepypasta-esque direction that this one goes in toward the end, as maybe the reasons for like why this boy is so fascinated with watching these videos is kind of slowly revealed. So yeah, I liked that as well. This one was also like really creepy. And the next one was another kind of more traditionally told story, which was concerning found videotapes, and it was called Junk Pickup by Fred Fisher the Fourth. And I really loved this one too. Like, it's about a kid named Peter who always goes along with his dad on these kind of junk picking expeditions on weekends. And on one particular outing, Peter finds this old like military footlocker, and it's full of old videotapes. Now, him and his dad, like, it's set in the present day, but him and his dad really like kind of finding these old caches of videotapes. They have like an old VCR like set up in the basement, and it's like, so they always kind of find it like treasure, you know what I mean? It's like, ooh, we're gonna pop some popcorn and get some sodas, and we're gonna sit down and like watch whatever the fuck is on these videotapes. So they're really excited that they found this one, and it's got this big pile in there. They said most of them over the years they found are usually just kind of like people's home movies, or, you know, mostly like just old music videos, or, you know, movies that people taped off cable, like with commercials on them, shit like that. But in this batch, there is actually one of the tapes that actually has like a bunch of old music videos that were taped off MTV. But then at the end, like when they're watching it, there's kind of like a little bit of a clip that's really eerie. That's kind of like a boy that at first seems like he's videotaping himself sleeping, and he like seems really nervous. I won't spoil what else is on the video, but suffice it to say that it is creepy as shit. It's pretty fucking creepy. And, you know, after the protagonist like sees this video, he decides that he's going to go back to the person, you know, where they bought the videotapes from, and see if he can like unravel the mystery of like who this boy is, and you know, things don't go too well. So the next one is called Disappearances at Coal Hill by Nick Kolakowski, and this starts out as kind of like a series of email exchanges between a writer named Rick and his editor, whose name is Catherine. And Rick is like pitching a story that he wants to write, or like that he wants to investigate, about a series of unexplained vanishings like in some dense woods, like a section of dense woods in Virginia. And after that kind of setup, the tale kind of then pivots to a newspaper story, and then it goes into like a string of posts on like a subreddit, which is called Our Mysterious Mysteries, where people are kind of talking about the missing people and speculating about what might be going on, like where they might have gone, because none of the bodies have been found. So one of the people posting on this subreddit lives in the area and actually is contacted by the editor from the first part of the story, Catherine, who wants to go out there and like see, you know, what happened, like with the initial thing, and terror ensues. Now, I really did like the buildup of this one, and the way it kept the story like mostly grounded in reality until the end, and then it went in a more, I guess, like an ambiguous direction a little bit. I think the best thing about this one actually was the way it left a lot of things to kind of be filled in by the reader, which is exactly how a story like this would kind of unfold in real life, as different people with different bits of information would all be trying to put together the pieces to a puzzle that nobody really knows the whole entire answer to. So the next story was called The Veiled Lady by Angela Sylvain, and that was told as a series of diary entries from this woman who has just woken up from a 14-month coma and is writing about her experiences in order to try to like trigger her memories from before the coma, like to come back. Like her doctor has told her to do that because she doesn't have a lot of memory or just fragmentary memories of what happened before she went into the coma or before like the accident or whatever it was. This story was actually very compelling and very cleverly constructed, as the narrator may or may not be reliable because of her injuries. That's all I'm going to say. And you kind of think the story is going one way, but then it goes kind of in a direction that you may not be expecting, which I actually wasn't expecting, so I really liked the surprise of it. This one was actually like a really good thriller and would probably make like a cool movie. Actually, like a lot of these stories would actually make really good movies now that I'm thinking about it. I mean, I really did like them in written form, and it was kind of cool that they were, like I said, found footage or mixed media. Some of these wouldn't even have to be found footage in movie form and they would still be good. I mean, it might help, but this one I've kind of felt like would make like a really good like classical type of thriller. So the next story, The Spew of News by Clay McLeod Chapman. This one was the kind of the most grimly funny of the bunch, I guess, and will probably be pretty relatable to a great number of people. That's what I'm going to say. Basically, it's about this guy whose elderly parents like start to change drastically after continually watching a news channel called Fax News, F-A-X. And I was like, that made me laugh so hard. Which promises just the facts, F-A-X. And basically broadcasts, I mean, you probably know where this is going, but it broadcasts nothing but like fear-mongering and outrage fodder, you know, much like some real ones. So the narrator has tried to reason with his parents, but they keep slipping like further and further into this angry little conspiracy-laden world. He finally gets really worried about them because he doesn't like hear from them for several days. And at first he just kind of thinks, oh, well, they're just being bitches and they don't want to talk to me because I'm trying to like, you know, talk to them and reason with them and they're mad at me. But after a while he starts to get really, really worried. He's like, yeah, they're really not answering their phone. So I really have to like drive down there and see, because he lives like 200 miles away or something. So he's like, I really have to drive down there and see what's going on with them. And so he goes to check on them, and let's just say it doesn't end all that well. This one was actually very topical, like I said, and would have been hilarious if it wasn't so painfully sad. I kind of found it really sad, but also like really kind of like blackly comic at the same time. So then the next one was called Joe Butler's Ghost Town Adventures, and that's very much like a classic sort of creepypasta tale, and it's told as a series of like descriptions of unsettling videos, and in particular like one unsettling video that was posted on a YouTube channel that was kind of like an exploring abandoned places type of channel. Now, whoever is writing the descriptions is speculating about the final video that was posted on the channel, which was only titled Help, but H-E-L-L-P, in which this supposedly abandoned town that whoever is filming the video is exploring. Sometimes there's sometimes like flashes of it like changing in ways that I won't spoil, like I said. So this was another really solid tale that kind of leaves the reader to fill in the blanks, and it's really, really spooky, like because it leaves so much to your imagination. So the shortest story in the collection was called Regular Saint by Donna Lynch, and this one's formatted, the way it's formatted is almost like a poem, like a free verse or something like that, or kind of like as a series of, it's kind of like a chain of these very, very terse messages that seem like they're being just put out there or exchanged between several girls whose names are all Mary, like it's Mary L, Mary N, or Mary C, or something like that, at a religious school, like a private school. They're talking about a classmate named Jeannie who uploaded a mysterious video having something to do with praying to Saint Dymphna. This one was a little bit, I'm going to say it's a little bit inscrutable, and it kind of left a lot to your imagination. But one thing that was kind of cool about it is that it really encouraged you to go like investigate the specifics about this saint, because it is a real saint, to figure out what happened in the story, because it doesn't tell you. You basically have to like go to like outside things to like figure out, to read between the lines essentially. So the next one was called Walls and Floors and Bricks and Stone by Georgia Cook. And that one also kind of started out as email exchanges and autopsy transcripts, like between two pathologists. And they're looking into this really bizarre case where this entire family died in a newly built house. Like they had just lived there for like a few weeks or something. And all the bodies had some weird unexplained thing like going on with them. Like the mom has like house bricks in her stomach, even though there's no way that they possibly have gotten in there. Like their whole, one of the guys has like a pipe like growing out of his head or something like that. This one was actually like a lot of fun too. It came across a little bit like a mashup between The Autopsy of Jane Doe, that 2016 movie, and the Brian Asman novel, which I reviewed like on here a long time ago, which is called Man, Fuck This House. If you've read that one, it was kind of like a combination of like the best things about both of those, but with its own kind of spin on it too. But yeah, like the whole concept like really pulled you right into the mystery. Like, so this lady has like bricks in her stomach and I can't figure out how they got in there. So it's like immediately I was just kind of like, oh, tell me more, you know what I mean? So yeah, it was really good. So the next one is called Summons, and that was written by Allie Wilkes, and it's told as a sort of like a deposition type thing at a panel. It's like a fitness to practice panel. So there's like a social worker named Miss Arnold, and she's kind of been brought before this committee to answer charges about a girl that had been under her care whose name was Emily Rook, whose parents have some interesting religious practices, let's call it that. So I actually like this one because while it's quite clear to the reader from Miss Arnold's descriptions, you know what's going on, but Miss Arnold herself, like the character, is kind of like clueless and naive, and so she's like really oblivious to like what's happening before her eyes, so it kind of like generates suspense in that way. But yeah, this was also a really good one. These were all good stories. I mean, you know what I mean? Like every single one of them is good. So even though I just said that, like one of my favorites in the book, like I said, it's kind of like hard to pick because they were all like really good. But one of my favorites in the book was actually called Green Magnetic Tape by Tim McGregor. And this story, which is actually structured not so much mixed media, but was structured like a traditional story. But the narrator is decluttering the garage, and he comes across a set of old videotapes of Jenny, who is his girlfriend of 5 years. Now, he's always known Jenny as a very straight arrow young woman. She doesn't drink. She only eats organic food. She's very, very tidy and organized. She's just one of those very kind of like into fitness and diet and health and all that kind of stuff. She's very much that kind of person. But the version of Jenny that he sees on these tapes is another type of person entirely, and he starts to become obsessed with the drastic difference between her past and present selves. So this was actually like kind of a really, really good psychological horror story about the breakdown of trust in a relationship and the idea that you can never really know another person like as well as you might think. The next one is called Accidents of a Sort by Kurt Fauver, and this is also fun and also like pretty bizarre, but I really dug it. It actually, at the end, it kind of goes a little bit in a metaphysical kind of direction. It's basically about two guys, like one older guy and one younger guy, who work at an insurance agency. And what they do is they study the aftermath of car accidents, like to determine fault. Like if there's video, they look at that, or if there's like police reports or whatever, they're trying to figure out like, how much the insurance company should pay out or whatever. So while the older guy, whose name is Vane, he's kind of like seen it all and he's really jaded at this point. The younger narrator is still kind of a noob, and sort of like the gruesomeness and just ultimate randomness and meaninglessness of these accidents that he's analyzing is still like really it still like affects him a lot. So he asks Vane one night, like out of curiosity, it's like, isn't there anything that you've ever seen like on the job that keeps you up at night, because he seems so unaffected by everything. At that point, Vane very reluctantly shows him a pretty fucked up video, which I'm not going to say what's on it, but I will say that it's of a seemingly impossible occurrence. And the narrator, like, after that, like, can't get it out of his head. So this one, yeah, it was like an excellent premise, and it kind of became across as like a little bit like profound and kind of like really thought-provoking, like the way it was resolved. Like I said, it almost kind of goes like in a weird like metaphysical, I don't want to say like what it reminded me of because that will kind of spoil it, but I'll just say it's like metaphysical. That's what I'm going to say. It kind of goes in that direction a little bit, and it really did kind of like make you think along those lines. So then there's a story by Bev Vincent, which is called A Grave Issue, and this actually deals with one of my very favorite horror tropes, which is like cursed media. In this case, it's a supposedly lost book by kind of a well-known author who has passed away, whose name is Ramsey Edwinson. Now, the story is actually told as a string of posts on an author fan forum. And it kind of tells about one poster on this forum, and they find like a brand new copy of a previously unknown book by this author at a yard sale, and they're kind of trying to determine like whether it's authentic or not. But it soon starts to become obvious that the book is possibly cursed. So like many of the other stories, the fun of this one kind of lies in what isn't revealed and what connections that the reader has to make, you know, themselves, which I think is kind of like the appeal of these type of so-called found footage stories, like in general, because I mean, in real life, they almost never have clear-cut resolution. So like a lot of the fun of it is like coming up with your own theories and stuff like that. So this one kind of had that vibe to it too. Like a lot of the stories in this had that, and that was like really appealing to me. So the next one was The Novak Roadhouse Massacre by Alan Baxter. And this one is formatted as a bunch of like police incident reports and transcripts of dashcam footage, which is concerning the supposed rampage of a purported vicious serial killer who is suspected to be a man named Carlton Davies. But as the story goes on, the reader starts to realize that maybe the killer is not this guy and is maybe perhaps not even human after all, and that there might be some kind of creature roaming through the wilds of Australia, because this is actually set in Australia, this story. Now, another one of the best stories in the book, in my opinion, was one called Robert Levy, and it was called This Video is Unavailable. And this one is laid out as kind of like an oral history type magazine story about what they call, and this is a quote, one of the darkest episodes born of the internet age. So it's basically like snippets of interviews with people that were involved in this particular incident. So we're learning about this a well-known beauty YouTuber whose name was Daniel Travers, and he ended up garnering like this really passionate fan following with his, you know, they say his personality was very genuine and he was very fearless and like being himself and like doing his thing. But over the course of him having like a channel, his fans start to notice like a change in him as the videos go on. And they start to fear that maybe something bad and possibly even like supernatural is maybe happening to him. So after they attempt to get help for him in more like traditional ways, like, you know, calling the police in whatever city he lives in and like trying to do welfare checks and stuff, that doesn't really work out. So they decide to take matters into their own hands, quite literally, as it turns out. And this one actually ends up being a very, very grim, kind of tragic story about like obsessive fandom and good intentions gone horribly wrong. And I think the scary thing about this one was that while it was exaggerated in places, it wasn't that exaggerated, and it does seem like something that could actually happen, which made it like a lot more sad and a lot more scary. So the next one, Dear Penny by Jeremy Hepler, was another kind of classic, you don't know your loved ones as well as you think you do story. And it has to do with this very strict, uptight, super religious, and also kind of like a little bit delusional mom whose name is Cheryl. And she discovers the hidden diary of her daughter, Maura, which is concealed in the innards of this big, huge stuffed panda bear named Penny. That's why it's called Dear Penny. So while Cheryl was always under the impression that her daughter was this like perfect angel, she was like this cheerleader and she was really good at school and she really loved going to church and blah, blah, blah. The diary ends up demonstrating that everything she thought that she knew about Maura was basically just this very carefully calculated facade, like that she's not really like that at all. This is another one that I think would make a really very gripping movie, to be honest, though. As I said, I think most of these absolutely would. But this one, like I said, I guess because it's more like a classic thriller, and I really liked that aspect of it. And the next story was called The Pall, and that's by Aristo Couveras. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that sort of correctly. This one actually goes in somewhat of like a kind of a cosmic horror direction, and it's sort of like positing at kind of like an Annihilation style anomaly, which is like hovering in the skies over the Indian Ocean, that may or may not have something to do with the real and kind of weird interstellar object, Oumuamua, which in the universe of the story is possibly sent by intelligent beings, but maybe not for the reasons that we might be suspecting. That's all I'm going to say. So yeah, this was like a very creepy, like Lovecraftian type of story. Like I said, if you like Annihilation, you might get into this one as well, because it's not similar, but it's like, I don't know, the theme is kind of similar. It's kind of just about like forces much greater than like humans can understand. So like I said, a lot more cosmic horror, the most cosmic horror out of the bunch. So yet another one of my very favorites in this collection, I had a lot of favorites in this, as you can tell, was the last story, which is by Alicia. Hopefully I'm kind of pronouncing that right. I'm terrible with pronouncing names, you guys. But it was called like A Small Hand-Built House. And this one was also kind of structured like a regular story, but was, very, very effective, very well told. The narrator is this recent widow named Hazel, and she basically, she had a husband who she'd been married to for 52 years, and his name was Parker, and he's died recently, obviously. That's why she's a widow. Now, many years before, Parker had built this little house, like out in the garden, like a little man cave type situation, before they would call it a man cave, but now they would call it a man cave. So it's a kind of a place that he would go to like be alone when he wanted to get away from her. Hazel never really minded it because, she kind of had her own shit going on, or her own hobbies, and she's just like, yeah, whatever, just get the hell out of here and do your own thing, whatever, just leave me alone. So she was never really all that curious as to what exactly he was doing out there. But one day, not too long after his death, she's in the little house looking for something like a flashlight or a tool or something that she thinks was out there. And while she's out there, she finds a videotape that Parker left for her that sends her on a pretty horrifying scavenger hunt that also has a pretty definite time limit. That's what I'm going to say. This one was, again, a very classic story about how you can be married to someone for half a century, for example, and not know jack about them. But the way it unfolded was like really, really entertaining. And I think like the characterization of Hazel was so appealing that I was kind of like immediately sucked into the story, even though it doesn't go in like it doesn't have like any big, huge twists or anything like that. But it's just like really laid out really well, and the characterization is good. So it's just like keeps you interested. And like I said, there's also kind of like a time limit aspect to it as well, so that like generates a lot of suspense. So I mean, if you're at all into found footage movies, ARGs, creepypasta style stories, I would not hesitate to recommend this anthology. Every single story in it is absolutely worth reading, and while they do all adhere to like a found footage or mixed media type of theme, there's actually like a lot of variety, a surprising amount of variety like within those parameters. So, I mean, there'll definitely be something for everybody. It's kind of like rare to come across an anthology as really consistently excellent as this one is. So I'm going to give like major props to the editors and all the authors involved, and also a special mention to the cover designer who actually like sold me on the concept like within a couple of seconds of like seeing it. But yeah, this was just like a really well put together package, and it gave me a really spooky good time. And I'm really, really glad also that DJ Maniak bought it for me, because now I can like go back and read it again like in a few months, because I absolutely do want to reread it and revisit it at some point in the future. So that'll do it for this installment of Tomes of Terror, and I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.